So, in general, most of us have already kind of heard this, but just to kind of catch everyone up to speed, just in case if you haven't, the parent company of PSA Collector recently acquired Beckett, which was another highly popular grading service. So, the big grading services prior to a week ago were PSA, Beckett, CGC, and SGC is kind of in there, but it's being kind of overlooked, which I'll kind of probably talk about later, and TAG. And so for those of you who don't know TAG, it's one of the newer, it's not the first to do it because AGS was before it. TAG is an AI specific grading company, whereas PSA, Beckett, CGC still use humans to grade, which is very similar to what we did today. So there's kind of like a lot of different avenues that people are going for. So PSA, or the collector, the parent company of PSA acquired Beckett. So now they're kind of all under the same conglomerate. So PSA, SGC, and Beckett are now under the umbrella of collector. Um, so in addition to that, PSA has been partnering with eBay, has been partnering with more market analysis like Card Ladder. They've had Card Ladder for quite some time now. To the point where the Pokemon life cycle outside of the moment you buy a pack, you open it, they being PSA, predominantly now controls the entire life cycle of a Pokemon card. Meaning that if you open up a pack of cards, you put it on eBay, someone that purchases that card on eBay at a certain value can then submit that card to be graded through PSA. PSA then grades it, and then they give you a buyback offer, which was one of the first major conflict of interest that was presented. And as of recent, there was some issues where someone was offered a buy it now at a PSA 9, but then came to find out that it was a PSA 10. So basically bumping up the grade in their favor, quote unquote. I don't know too much about it. I don't know where that went. So kind of do your own research on that. But that has circulated enough to where people are panicking a little bit, which is warranted because, again, they control the entire life cycle. In addition, with those buybacks, a lot of places like GameStop or Boxed are consuming a lot of these cards or purchasing them at such a high percentage because they expect you as the consumer to buy into those kind of mystery products, those mystery bags, because they need the big chases, but they also need the big floors as well. So the more people have been enticed with like the 95% buyback percentage, which was a big thing I talked about at least like a month or two ago, where people were saying, "Oh, sell it to PSA, vendors can't compete." It's like, well, if you sell it to PSA, this is kind of what you're asking for, which I'll kind of get to in a minute. So all that being said, that's kind of where we're at right now. And so with them being in these kind of sets of controversy, and being kind of controlling the entire life cycle, the biggest thing that comes to mind, and I think comes to a lot of people's mind, is the trust. Like for a grading company to hold any strength, it needs the trust of the consumer to stand on its feet, right? That's why there's hundreds of grading companies that we haven't even heard of, because we as a collective have not seen enough of their report to trust them to invest, right? So that's why TAG is such like a big like motivator for people to try to go towards, but they are a relatively new company and they don't have a lot of inherent trust as of yet because of the data, which I'm gonna kind of get into here in a second. So with the grading methodology now evolving, with AI being so predominant, the question before AI was what human graders are the best. And in my opinion, Beckett had some of the highest grading standards for people on average compared to the other grading companies specifically. And so people would either select Beckett for that standard for like chasing the black label, or people would prefer the PSA standard because of how they grade and how their tens just kind of hold like more value overall versus trying to get the same card as like a Beckett like BGS 9.5. But then you also had CGC, who initially was into comic books, but during COVID kind of was the new rising star to fill in the demand gap during COVID. So now TAG and AGS was kind of the first kind of pioneer but they kind of fell flat. So now tag is kind of taking place. Now it's kind of human versus AI. So there's a lot of arguments that people make to where, I want my cards to be assessed by AI. I want the human element to be removed out of it totally. But then there's also people that are like, well, the human element still exists because it's this kind of battle of perfection versus judgment. Some people want the perfection of AI, but then there's some people that want the judgment of a person, because there is kind of that inherent eye appeal and kind of more of that human factor to it. So why am I kind of talking about tag and PSA? So the one thing that we saw within this last week is Collector purchasing Beckett. That's a competitor that Collector is basically absorbing, whether it's for better or for worse. It happened. One of the things that I hope to see happen is what I was talking about with Beckett's high grading standards. Hopefully Collector can kind of use that training that they use at Beckett to kind of give to PSA employees in some degree. But we'll see what that comes to. But tag, it's not necessarily the question that I've seen is, will PSA acquire tag? I don't think that will happen. If anything, one of two things will most likely happen going into 2026. Again, I have no proof. There's nothing that I have that holds any data. It's just kind of, if I were to read the tea leaves, so to speak, this is what I'd probably imagine. So with tag, their main driver is AI grading. With how much AI has grown, there's nothing stopping PSA from introducing that as a new technology on their own, which then completely deflates tag. So why do I say it would completely deflate tag? Because now all the people who were saying AI is better because we want that perfection, if you compare that argument to PSA now having AI, now it goes back to the days prior to AI. It's which was, which human graders do we like better? It then becomes, what AI do we like better? Do we like tag's AI better, or do we like PSA's AI better? That's what it's going to be. And so if it becomes that, there's really no legs for tag to stand on at that point. And so there's probably a good question, or a response to that question, or that response rather, would be, well, tag is just a better company. We want to support tag. And my response to that is, until we as a community stop leveraging PSA's data sets for establishing market price trust, no other grading company will hold any legs whatsoever. I was talking about what happens to tag when PSA does adopt AI. Yes, your Pokemon daddy is back. So yeah. So what I was leading into with tag specifically was, if people want tag CGC to go up against the Goliath now that is Collector, the parent company of PSA, SGC, and now Beckett, people need to stop using the data that PSA provides to establish a market price, because the trust is in the data. And so there is so much sales data and so much of it from years and years that has been established through PSA, that's where the inherent trust comes from. It's not really the grading standard or the grading qualifiers really with PSA. It's more of, there's so much sales data to judge where to go, or what a card should be, shouldn't be, whatever. So what really needs to happen is, we can't use PSA data. It is what it is. So a good example of that is, let's say that there's a card, very vintage, very, very old card, that hasn't sold in a very long time, ungraded. So let's say a TCG player. This happens a lot. So let's say a card doesn't sell for a year. That is near mint. It's a vintage card. Not a lot of sales happen. What is the first thing after that people often do from both buyers and sellers? The result is, what would this be as a PSA grade? A general assumption of what that card would be as a PSA grade. So let's say, that we have this psychic energy, and we say, yeah, I think it's probably like near mint. It'd probably get like a PSA 7. And so now, how do we then give a rough estimate on from buyer and seller? How do we establish the trust of where we decide this market price is? We then go and check PSA's sales data, check the market, and what do PSA 7s typically sell for? There's going to be, on average, more sales data for that than any other grading company through, like, because we're not looking at we're not looking at BGS 7s, we're not looking at CGC 7s. At this point, we're not even looking at TAG 7s to establish a fair market price at the moment of the transaction. We are going to look at PSA 7s every single time. And so the moment both parties do that, you continue to leverage and continue to look at PSA as the golden standard of market price trust within cards, just full stop, because that's for both raw and for raw. That's hard to find if you can't find enough data on TCG Player, but then enough data to find like what you kind of agree as kind of like the accepted grade, so to speak. So we have to stop doing that. We have to stop looking at PSA sales data if we want any of the other grading companies to hold any water. And I don't think that's going to happen, to be quite honest with you. I genuinely don't think that's going to happen. Unless there's some huge legal thing that happens with PSA to kind of break open either their practices of controlling the entire loop or having better sales data across multiple platforms. Because if people continue to say, hey, we want to support tag, we're going to keep selling these tag slabs and seeing what happens, then it is what it is. So the thing that we have to kind of keep in mind, if we look historically, is if we're just kind of taking a snapshot of PSA, what has happened from the PSA standard as a whole. So back in the day, PSA grading cards really just kind of like the preservation more so than the value. But as the years progressed, it kind of cooperated between the two, but then value really started to shine with kind of the preservation and really kind of took a front seat of why we grade in the first place, to have more inherent value. But as technology gets better, as better practices, more sales, like more grading data, more skilled graders, the standard naturally gets higher. So when people say, I don't want to consider an old cert, there's more of a premium for newer certs, that's kind of that phase that we're starting to see, or did see, within the last like few years. So when people talk about new certs versus old certs, there's a quote unquote premium for new certs for older stuff because the grading standard is so much better than what it used to be back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, right? So that's why there's a premium for that. So what Aaron's saying, and kind of what I'm leading into, is the moment PSA introduces AI, since the market has already opened that Pandora's box of saying, hey, we value newer certs for older cards much higher than their older cert counterpart, since that is now an established kind of agreed upon quote unquote data point within the hobby, that also now has to be said for when PSA introduces AI into their systems. Because we've already done it with new certs, that argument's already been made and that Pandora's box cannot be closed. So you have to apply the same argument to graded copies. Now, what I will say that I think would be an excellent move on PSA's part is not to go down the route of tag, meaning trust AI only. I think that AI and humans should still be cooperative in the grading space. So an example that I actually gave to a buddy of mine the other day is let's take a hospital setting, right? So in like the medical field right now, like let's take like radiologists, for example. So when they take a CAT scan or a CT or an MRI, whatever, they look for anomalies on, like on your chest or your arm or whatever. The radiologist, as the human, sits there and looks at any anomalies to point, hey, this might be a tumor, this might be an issue, whatever. AI has now made that investigation much more streamlined, that task much more streamlined. So AI is making that easier. However, we as people, or I guess I can just talk me specifically, I would be very concerned if I just blanket said, hey, AI looked at my MRI and determined that there is some mass in my chest. I'm going to take their word for it 100% and I'm going to have them do whatever. Oops, the MRI decided to take out my heart. Let's just use that as an extreme example, right? The mass that they were detecting was my heart. We don't want that. Instead, we want like someone like a radiologist to view to speed up the process of what the AI determined, like, hey, there's a mass here. And the radiologist is there to verify the information that the AI has kind of detected, right? So it's like, okay, AI said that there's two masses here and one large mass here that's kind of highlighting. So the radiologist says, well, those two small ones are actually really good points and good thing that they found that. But the big one, that's actually a person's heart. We're not going to touch that. So take that idea, the trust AI but verify with humans, take that into grading. So trust that AI will be able to highlight all these big things, highlight imperfections, highlight like centering to provide that much needed transparency that PSA is in desperate need of, but have the grading standards of Beckett, now that Collector has them under their wing. Beckett can then cross-train PSA to be better graders overall, but have them review what the AI has detected, no different than a radiologist reviewing someone's MRI that the AI has detected as potential anomalies or masses or something that needs to be considered or looked at. So if PSA does a trust AI, verify with humans mentality, that will be absolute final nail in the coffin for TAG or any other grading company, because of the amount of sheer data that PSA has. Because what's going to happen is as we kind of shift to the new, like kind of the new phase of, you know, old certs are less than new certs, it's going to be new certs are less than AI certs for PSA. So that would be a huge benefit for them. So why I bring that up is if you guys have been here before, I often talk about gamblers' tens. I talk about gamblers' tens or cards that, you know, got nines that should have been tens, or cards that got tens and should have gotten nines. All of the grade review stuff that I talk about in these streams all the time, I would strongly revisit your tens. Like for example, or like tens and nines. So like for example, like this Mega Aggron that I have as a PSA 9, or this Malo and Lena, right? With the skills and the techniques that I've kind of shown in the beginning of stream during grade review, you know, these are cards that I would personally look at again, because if I genuinely believe that this card would get a 10 any day of the week, there's going to be a point where we as a community, we as like the collector sphere, have to determine if AI grading and like that combination of AI human grading is going to be more of a premium than the new certs of today, which would result in me, like if I really, really cared about like the value and less of the preservation or the collectability, I would crack this out just to attempt to regrade to get that newer cert, that newer AI cert. But if there were cards that I didn't think, well, it probably shouldn't have gotten a 10, but it did anyway, me going into 2026, I'm going to try to get those out of there, to be very, very transparent, because the moment that switch happens, that's going to be the only thing that we're going to be hearing about is new certs are out, AI or AI human certs are in. Get those questionable 10s out. Or even the same thing with the 9s. If you have any 9s that you thought, man, that should have gotten a 10 any day of the week, crack those out and submit those under the new AI. Like if you really truly believe that it is, that AI transparency will in fact call that human error out because of that transparency, which is, I think, a really, really big plus in the hobby, to kind of trust AI but verify with humans. And so if you haven't graded, legitimately, I have this whole thing of cards that I'm waiting to hear. I'm basically what my intention is with cards that I have a very strong suspicion that they will get 10s. I need to wait. So like all of these are all cards that I want to submit to PSA, but I genuinely don't know where the grading sphere is going. These aren't going anywhere. The condition isn't going to be getting any worse because I have them protected. So I can afford to wait. In addition, the wait times of this stuff is so astronomically high that I'd rather just wait the first quarter to see if PSA decides to introduce AI grading, which I know they will. Not that I have insider knowledge or anything, but it just makes sense. So that's kind of where I'm kind of positioning myself. Is I'm going to be looking over my 10s. If I genuinely believe that they warranted the 10, I'm just going to keep them, and if I need to crack them open and regrade expecting a 10 to come back, I'll leave it that way if I need to. If there are cards that I received that were 10s that I thought were questionable, I'm going to try to get rid of them as soon as possible, because the moment I try to crack them and regrade them, it might be a worse grade, and that's not good. That's not good for me. But then anything else, like the 9s, do the same thing. If I thought they should have gotten 10s but got 9s, wait till the AI grading is introduced, then regrade. And then anything that hasn't been graded yet, wait until they make that announcement and then submit. So I think that's really going to be the big thing. I have to go. You have a good stream. I appreciate you, Waste. Thanks for hearing me yap. So yeah, waiting to see what Pokemon is named after me. We're going to get into that right in a second. So I'm going to open it up to any questions. So basically that's kind of my thought is, I think if people really want PSA to kind of not be number one anymore, people are going to have to stop using its data. Full stop. If they want TAG or CGC, like when prices are talked about, it's like, hey, what would be the market price for the CGC 9? You can only look at CGC 9 prices. The moment you shift, well, there's not enough data here, let's see what a PSA 8 or a PSA 9 is, completely delegitimizes that attempt. You have to stick with that grading company if you want that grading company to succeed. No questions asked. Same thing, and that's why TAG is so hard to comp, because there's not a lot of data. There's not a lot of sample sizes and sample sets for TAG in terms from a sales perspective compared to PSA. So that's why when how much is a TAG 8.5? I don't know. Let's look at PSA 8s to 9s and do an average of the two. That's kind of where I'm at. So, yeah, I'll see if you guys have any questions before I hop on to Pokemon Yellow Nuzlocke. Get some progress there. I might have missed it when the stream dropped, but how long are you waiting until I grade anything again? I'm probably going to wait for the first quarter, because my cards, like if I think a card, I don't grade what I've called gambler's 10s in the past. Like if I think a card should get a 10, like pretty confidently, those are the only cards that I submit. I don't really gamble on 10s. So I'll probably wait for the first quarter to see, because most likely with in our era, social media attention gets a lot of spark in the beginning but dies out very fast. So it'll be interesting come January or February if people are even talking about this stuff anymore. It's really hot right now, but it probably will fizzle out until PSA decides that instead of, because people keep talking about this monopoly, whatever, which I don't really think it will be considered one, to be honest. I don't know if the federal government will care enough. But really what it boils down to is if PSA introduces a new technology like AI, since AI is so popular, they're really not buying out TAG per se. So TAG itself will still be an independent company, but PSA is introducing a technology that is only keeping TAG afloat. TAG's golden quote is, we use AI, we don't use humans. But the moment PSA says, well, we're using AI now too, now what? TAG has nothing other than the slab, in my opinion, looks better. That's literally the only thing that it'll have.